On a cool and clear October morning, the drumming of pistons and thunder of exhaust reverberates from lofty canyon walls as an eastbound Union Pacific train makes its way up the Meadow Valley Wash toward the small town of Caliente in southern Nevada. It is traveling over a 780-mile course carved out of the remote desert country in the early 20th century, Union Pacific's Los Angeles and Salt Lake route. The middle portion of the line is known as the Caliente Subdivision, running between Las Vegas, Nevada, and Milford, Utah. Nearly a dozen trains use the rails in a 24-hour period, including manifests. Stack trains, auto racks, unit coal and ore trains, and high-priority Z trains. We will begin near Las Vegas and head east for 240 miles to the crew change point at Milford, Utah. Trains race across a desert floor and snake through deep canyons and tunnels. This is where the solitude of a timeless setting can be found at nearly every milepost and around every curve. The highlight of the route is the scenic Rainbow Canyon, where trains pass beneath massive walls of multicolored rock. Join us now for Union Pacific's Caliente Subdivision. The heart of Union Pacific's Los Angeles and Salt Lake line runs between the connection with the Santa Fe Transcon at Daggett, California, and Salt Lake City, Utah. Most of the line is operated as single-track CTC with sidings. In the southern portion, we find the SEMA Subdivision, which runs through Afton Canyon and over SEMA Hill before arriving at Las Vegas. Today's journey picks up just north of Vegas near Apex and heads railroad east to Moapa, junction with the Mead Lake branch. From here, the railroad enters the Meadow Valley Wash, following its course to Caliente through Farrier, and up a 1% grade past the sidings of rocks, Hoya, Galt, Vigo, and Carp. At Leith, the grade increases to 1.5% as the canyon walls close in through Kyle and Elgin. At this point, the railroad enters the Rainbow Canyon area, with some of the most scenic views around Boyd. This is also tunnel country, and trains pass through a total of 7 tunnels between Leith and Caliente. The 1.5% grade continues through Boyd, then lessens to 1% through Etna and Caliente, midway point on the subdivision. Here, the grade leaves the Meadow Valley Wash and turns in a easterly direction, beginning a 2% climb through Clover Creek Canyon at Eccles, Richmond, and Island, lessening to 1.5% through Acoma and Brown before reaching the highest point on the railroad at Crestline. At this point, it is a downhill run into the state of Utah at Uvada and into the Escalante Desert through Modena, Heist, Beryl, and Zane. The Cedar City branch joins the railroad at Lund, and from here trains race across the desert through Latmere, Thermo, and Upton before reaching the crew change point at Milford, Utah. We have a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started now. Out of the barren and lifeless void of the desert, a light shines forth. The 28th most populated city in the United States, Las Vegas, rises like a large cruise ship out of a sea of blackness. It has garnered many nicknames over the past century, including Sin City, the entertainment capital of the world, and America's playground. At the dawn of this desert metropolis in 1905, Las Vegas was just 110 acres of land adjacent to a railroad line that ran between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City. The building of the nearby Hoover Dam brought throngs of workers to the desert town when jobs were scarce during the Great Depression in the early 1930s. By the end of World War II, Vegas became synonymous with lush casinos, hotels, and big-name entertainment. The skyline rises out of the desert floor from this vista near Apex on Union Pacific's Caliente Subdivision. A big curve overlooking the city has been a popular location for local rail fans, although the landscape appears to be changing with development. This morning, the curve is negotiated by UP 6720 East as it takes a Chicago-bound stack train up the 1% climb out of Las Vegas. In addition to the two GE C44-9 ACs on the point, a lone EMD SD70 ACE works by remote control 3/4 of the way back on this 9,000-foot-long train. The sound of hard-working locomotives are sometimes drowned out in the thunder of jets out of nearby Nellis Air Force Base. Turning to the east, the railroad passes industry thriving in the desert, including a limestone quarry located near the siding of Apex, which is at the top of the grade out of Las Vegas. It is served by the UP. The Mead Lake Local holds the siding of Apex for a westbound before heading to the mine. UP 6686 powers the IG-2LA, a Global to Chicago to Los Angeles stack train that makes a regular appearance on the LANSL. Loads of gypsum board, or sheetrock from a nearby gypsum mine, wait to be picked up by the UP, while I-15 traffic pass beneath the industrial spur. A second GE is tucked into the middle of the long snake of domestic stacks. Once the stack train has cleared, the Mead Lake local backs down the main to service the quarry at Aerolime, milepost 353.8. Owned and operated by Lowast North America, this is known as the Apex plant. It consists of a quarry mine, crushing operation, and processing plant, producing both calcium limestone and dolomite. It is used in construction and is a key ingredient of cement. While switching at Aerolime, trains often block North Las Vegas Boulevard, which is busy with truck traffic. To speed up the process, the conductor gets a lift from the PTI driver. With the switch lined, the local heads for the main behind a white cloud as the UP 8816's traction motor blowers kick up some of the lime from the ballast. The train heads for Las Vegas, and we turn east through the Dry Lake Valley as the railroad drops down a 1% grade to the lowest point on the Caliente Subdivision. At milepost 382.5, we arrive at Moapa, which is an 8,919-foot siding and junction with the UP's Mead Lake Subdivision. That branch leads 17.2 miles south, following the Muddy River to a Simplot sand mine at Mead Lake. At an elevation of 1,663 feet above sea level, Moapa is the lowest point on the Caliente Sub, at the base of the Meadow Valley Wash. Near the west end of the siding, a couple of hoppers are spotted at a small offloading facility, which is used to transfer dry bulk commodities from rail cars to trucks, such as cattle feed, fertilizer, and the like. These small portable augers can transfer the car's load to truck for delivery to customers in the area. After the truck departs, a green signal shows at the west end of Moapa for UP 8516 West, which speeds past the junction on the 60-mile-per-hour track. This is train ZSCLB, a daily Salt Lake City to Long Beach, California train that is usually seen in the mid-morning. Today's train is pushing 12,000 feet in length and is powered by 4 EMDs, 2 on the point and 2 mid-train remotes. The marine containers are empty, but the train's exceptional length requires extra power. The second half of the train usually has trailers mixed in with stacks. Often FedEx and UPS trailers are found, although none are on today's train, save a few Swift. Shortly after the Z, the IG2LA races through Moapa behind a lone GE number 6047. The train consists of domestic containers and runs daily between the Global 2 Intermodal Facility in Illinois and East Yard in Los Angeles. An EMD Ace number 8877 adds 4,300 horsepower to the middle of the train. At the end of a long day, UP 8069 East waits in the siding at Moapa for a North Platte to West Colton manifest. With the MNPWC out of the way, UP 8069 continues east with its counterpart, the MWCNP. These manifests make a regular appearance on the Caliente Sub. The train heads off into the gathering dusk as it begins its long nighttime climb up the Meadow Valley Wash, eventually reaching the summit at Crestline, gaining over 4,000 feet in elevation in the next 110 miles. The main line continues nearly due north toward the siding of Farrier. To the east, the 6,471-foot Moapa Peak jets above the red layered sandstone cliffs that somewhat relieve the monotony of the arid desert landscape. The pair of steel rails do the same at Farrier, a 6,066-foot siding at milepost 392.4. Nestled between the Meadow Valley Mountains to the north and the Mormon Mountains to the south, it is a quiet and remote place, where only the sound of the wind is heard whispering through the classic code lines that somehow are still standing, although no longer used. The desert silence is broken by the sound of hard-working GEs on the point of an eastbound stack train making its way up the Meadow Valley Wash. UP 8001 powers train ILAG-3, consisting almost entirely of marine double stacks, with a few domestics sprinkled in for good measure. The trailing SD70 ACE winds up as the train heads for the canyons that lay ahead. The signals at control point CP-C394 are all red, indicating our next eastbound is approaching the block. UP 5530 brings a short double-stack train east. As the train disappears behind the sandstone cliffs, it enters a part of the railroad that can no longer be accessed by the public, passing the sidings of Rocks, Hoya, Galt, and Vigo. The canyon is prone to washouts, and the only access is on UP property behind a locked gate. Still, there is plenty of fantastic canyon running coming up in the miles ahead. Joshua trees are about the biggest thing that grows in the miles of desert. Where there is some water, groves of cottonwoods congregate, as they do at the east end of Carp, an 8,532-foot siding near milepost 419. The signals at control point CP419 are all red, warning of the approaching ZSCLB. If you are waiting on that package coming FedEx ground, here it comes. After hiding somewhere in the canyon for the Z, UP 8814 heads east through Carp with a manifest for North Platte. Rugged and treeless, the Mormon Mountains stand like a formidable opponent for any railroad man daring to lay tracks through this desert country. But the Meadow Valley Wash proved an easy course with a gentle grade of no more than 1.5%. Here, the country is open, but as we head railroad east, the mountains will soon be closing in. At Leith, the headlight of a westbound appears as it exits the maze of canyons gouged by the wash. UP 8250 is in dynamics as it leads the heavy train of Utah coal down the 1.5% grade through Leith. We often think of trains as large and formidable machines, yet they are easily swallowed up by the vastness of the desert. East of Leith, towering cliffs advance on either side of the railroad as we enter what is known as the High Line. A short through-truss and girder deck bridge takes the UP over the Meadow Valley Wash and Carp Road near the east portal of Tunnel 4. UP 9063 leads a westbound manifest down the 1.5% grade. Tunnel 4 is 1,226 feet long, making it the second longest on the subdivision. More autoracks head west in the shadow of the canyon. The UP continues to weave through the narrow canyon through Kyle and onto Elgin at milepost 437.8. The historic Elgin Schoolhouse stands near a grade crossing where grades 1 through 8 were taught between 1922 and 1967. It served children living on a number of ranches in the Rainbow Canyon area, which sprang up when the railroad punched through here in 1903. The one-room schoolhouse is now preserved as a state historic site and open for tours during the summer months. The classic UP caboose was added to the site recently and is significant since it was the railroad that brought the need for the school. UP 7763 heads east through Elgin. UP 7045 leads another westbound coal train through Elgin on a pleasant afternoon in October. Milepost 441.9 marks Tunnel 5. A UP Herald has sat near the west bore of the 578-foot tunnel for decades. The daily Salt Lake to Long Beach Z heads west. One of the most scenic portions of the line can be found between Elgin and Stein, in what is known as Rainbow Canyon. Wedged in between the Del Mar and Clover mountains, the colorful canyon walls rise to heights of up to 3,000 feet above the Meadow Valley Wash, offering a ton of photographic opportunities, regardless of the time of day. For rail fans, this has always been a hot spot for photographing trains, and we'll be spending some extra time here. The wash of dynamic brake fans rises from the UP 2592 West as it heads downgrade through Boyd. Track speed has slowed to 30 in the canyon. Let's pace UP 2728 west as it leads another long stack train down the 1.5% grade through Boyd. Back on the ground, UP 7811 heads west, leading the daily Salt Lake City Z through Rainbow Canyon, just west of Boyd. During our visit, these trains were usually quite long, pushing 2.5 miles in length. At 30 miles per hour, it takes a while for these monsters to pass. Fall is a great time of the year to visit Rainbow Canyon. In addition to the colorful cliffs that tower above the tracks, the foliage adds its own hues to the scene, like the rabbit brush which blooms in September and October. Cottonwoods are found throughout the canyon floor, and they too begin to turn color as the days grow shorter. You can wait for several hours in between trains on the Caliente Subdivision, but it isn't so bad when your surroundings look like this. UP 8809 leads an autorack train west in the mid-afternoon. A short time later, UP 6495 takes an empty coal train east. Continuing east toward Caliente, the main line crosses Rainbow Canyon Road near milepost 448. The daily Salt Lake City Z heads west. The colors of the canyon include the bleached faces of giant limestone cliffs, which erupt out of the ground near the siding of Stein. Rainbow Canyon offers you a good dose of two things: beauty and solitude. And to those who are patient, a third, UP 6714 West at Tunnel 7. East of Stein, UP 7763 leads a stack train upgrade through the upper reaches of Rainbow Canyon. A manifest bound for North Platte, Nebraska exits Tunnel 9 and past the siding of Etna near milepost 454. Here is a ground level shot of a westbound rack train approaching the west switch of Etna. We are now just a few miles compass south of Caliente, where Tunnel 10 bores through the foot of the Del Mar Mountains, guarding the western side of the Meadow Valley Wash. It's about 35 degrees on a fresh October morning, and the high cliff faces radiate the first light of day. Hundreds of cliff-dwelling birds live in the area, and when they set out for a morning flight, they all go together in a noisy throng. A stack train is waiting at Caliente for an eastbound. UP 2522 takes a West Colton to North Platte manifest east. A string of empty ethanol cars are cut into the middle of the train, indicated by the red placards numbered 1987. Within a few minutes, the signal shows clear for the UP 5543 West. The canyon widens as we approach Caliente. To the east, towering limestone cliffs mark the entrance to Kershaw-Ryan State Park, located near the north end of Rainbow Canyon. Noted Western author Zane Grey spent a lot of time in the Rainbow Canyon area and is said to have written some of his books here, drawing from the canyon's beauty and solitude for inspiration. Even in the 21st century, that can still be found by those who seek it out. At control point CPC 458, the line goes to double track for 2.8 miles through Caliente. With the increasing number of trains exceeding siding lengths on the subdivision, this is a popular place for making meets. Today, an eastbound empty ore train symboled the OLBIS has clear signals through town on Main 2 as it heads for the mines near Cedar City, Utah. The train passes a former yard on the left side of the tracks. Caliente was formed in 1901 on land belonging to ranchers William and Charles Culverwell. Originally known as Dutchman Flat, the fertile valley was rich in orchards, dairies, and lush farmlands. Known for its natural hot springs and towering cottonwood trees, it was first settled in the 1860s and grew when Edward Harriman's LA&SL route was built through here in 1901. It was named Calientes after the hot springs, but the S was dropped when a post office was built the following year. This was a railroad town and a division point on the UP until the 1940s. When the division point was moved to Las Vegas, many town residents followed the railroad jobs, and Caliente's population began to dwindle. Today, it is home to around 1,100 people. The centerpiece of town is a 1923 mission-style depot built by the UP at the cost of a whopping $83,600. The depot boasted a restaurant and a 50-room hotel on the upper floor. On the railroad, Caliente is the halfway point between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City, and UP wanted something grand on the 50-yard line. The end of the steam era was the end of Caliente's heyday as a railroad town. Years later, the historic depot served Amtrak's Desert Wind until the train was discontinued in 1993. Fortunately, the depot has been preserved and used today as the City Hall, library, and museum. Just south of the depot, you'll find the Boxcar Museum and a bay window caboose on display. It is a great place to watch trains pass the once busy town. In the gathering darkness, the hottest train on the subdivision passes through Caliente, the ZLADV. Bound for Denver, Colorado, this $1 million train is made up of auto racks, stacks, and trailers, and runs Tuesdays through Saturdays. The train chases the sunset into Clover Creek Canyon as it rumbles out of town. Another day of rail fanning has drawn to a close. The next morning, the signals are hot at control point C460. UP 8778 takes double stacks westbound past the depot. At the east end of town, one can find the remains of an old railroad grade which passes the Hot Springs Hotel. This was the Pioche branch, which ran 42 miles to a mine in the town of Pioche. It was constructed in 1907 to haul high-grade silver ore and other minerals such as gold, lead, and zinc to Salt Lake City. The line lasted into the early 1980s, and a good portion of the grade is still visible to this day. As the October sun heads toward the western sky, UP 2595 brings today's ZLADV through Caliente and past a maintenance of way yard before ducking into Clover Creek Canyon. Leaving the Meadow Valley Wash, the railroad turns east following the course of Clover Creek. Unlike the dry desert wash we have been following over the past 70 miles, Clover Creek has the look and sound of a traditional creek. Out in the desert, this is a good sound. After a series of floods, which affected a good portion of the LANSL, most notably the flood of January 1, 1910 following a heavy rain, the line underwent a series of relocation projects, which included tunnels 4 through 10 in the Meadow Valley Wash and tunnels 11 through 18 in Clover Creek Canyon. One of which is Tunnel 11, as seen here near milepost 463. This is the longest tunnel on the subdivision at 1,324 feet in length. In the chill of a late October morning, the ground rumbles under our feet as the westbound Z SCLB passes through Tunnel 12 and into view. Climbing down from Tunnel 12, we see another massive rock face with similar features to what Tunnel 11 drills through. Just north of the main, a pair of boxcars have found a new purpose in life, as a shack of some sort. Whoever resides there would have a good view of the railroad, if he had windows. UP 9051 heads east out of Tunnel 12 with a manifest and a nice lash-up of power, including a Ferromex SD70 ACE number 4079, and UP 3090, a new EMD Tier 4 SD70 ACE. Unlike the competing GE Tier 4 diesels, which are everywhere, EMD's version with a Caterpillar 4-stroke engine is still a rarity. The extra head-end power is being shuttled east where it is needed. The next siding east of Caliente is Eccles at milepost 463.9. The clear block is for the daily Salt Lake City Z, which drops down the 2% grade, the steepest on the subdivision. Like Caliente, Eccles is a section of double track 3 miles in length. Since many sidings are too short for the monster 12,000-foot-long trains that run these days, Eccles does come in handy when running opposing traffic against a no-fitter, as railroaders call them. Today's Z train qualifies. Continuing railroad east of Eccles, access is limited in the Clover Creek Canyon, so we push on toward the former Mormon settlement of Barclay, between Island and Acoma. The Ghost Town site is among the ranches which thrive in the Little Valley. UP 5707 West leads another Salt Lake City Z out of a cut between Acoma and Barclay. The 12,000-foot train is having issues with its mid-train remote, which keeps losing its comm link with the lead engine. The crew is hoping the problem can be fixed without the conductor having to make the long walk back to the rear unit. The DPU in question, UP 5957, comes into view over 6,000 feet from the head end. Trains reach the top of the grade at Crestline, an elevation of 5,982 feet above sea level. UP 8861 East slowly crosses the apex of the grade in preparation for a meet with a westbound at Crestline siding, around the curve to the east. Several minutes later, UP 5859 West approaches through the Big Cut, working the 1% grade up the east side. The train waited on the main for the manifest to arrive. Here, the countryside changes from canyons and deserts to a forest of juniper and pinyon. The high altitude of this region draws enough moisture from the air to grow something bigger than sagebrush and cholla. An ambitious relocation project took place at Crestline in 1982. The old line zigged and zagged to the north around an impressive horseshoe at milepost 495.7. The old grade is still visible today, and we can only imagine the sight and sound of trains grinding through the big curve. From the old grade, we can see the new siding of Crestline, which is farther to the east than the original siding. It is also the last siding in the state of Nevada. If you travel east on Highway 319, this is the welcome you get when entering Utah. On the railroad, you get this. Welcome to Uvada, a 6,007-foot siding with its west switch right on the state line at control point CPC 501. Right on time, a westbound manifest approaches the state line after passing through Devil's Gap. Our eastward journey has led us out of the mountains at Crestline and into the Escalante Desert for the remainder of our trek across the Caliente Sub. Milepost 509.6 is Modena, Utah. Dating back to 1899, it is a ghost town whose centerpiece is a water tower and pump house. The town was once an important shipping center thanks to the railroad and nearby mines at Iron City. Today, only a few people live here, while most of the buildings sit abandoned and preserved in the desert climate. On the UP timetable, Modena is a 6,000-foot siding where trains occasionally make meets. This afternoon, UP 7061 West highballs the town. The Escalante Desert region of southwest Utah is an arid and sparsely populated place, surrounded by bare mountains to the north and south. Many settlers tried to make it here with the coming of the railroad, but there was only enough water for a handful of farms and ranches. So most pushed on, seeking better odds. The railroad passes through an empty and mostly forgotten land. At Beryl lie the bones of old signals which guided trains through the desert for decades. Now the old sentinels lie in ruin, replaced with newer digital technology. But even these will someday join the older generations before them in some forgotten place. Like Modena, Beryl is a ghost town, only less noticeable, with only a few structures including this old wooden boxcar. A former UP Maintenance of Way office sits abandoned south of the main line. Made out of a trailer, it contained a small office space with a bathroom and appears to not have been occupied since the early 2000s. Out here, you have the sun, wind, and occasional train for company. Near sunset, the signals are hot at the east end of Beryl for an approaching rack train. UP 2705 is the lone engine on this 7,000-foot-long train. All loads heading west. The final miles between Modena and Milford are a racetrack with a maximum speed of 70 for freight and 79 for passengers, if any passenger trains were to run here. The railroad continues east past the siding of Zane, named for Western author Zane Grey, and on to Lund, where the Cedar City subdivision joins the main line. The branch line heads 32 miles south to Cedar City and currently sees ore trains on a weekly basis, as well as a local out of Milford. Lund is also a 9,100-foot siding. Like Beryl and Modena, it is a site of yet another ghost town, which was once an important station stop on the LA and SL. In 1923, Union Pacific built this junction to Cedar City, in part to promote tourism to southern Utah's national parks, and passenger trains ran during the summer months until 1967. Today, most trains shoot by without stopping, such as UP 6690 West, with a unit train of Utah coal. This is the eastern end of UP Dispatcher 7's territory, so at Lund, train crews change their radio channel from 27 to 42, and Dispatcher 5 guides them the rest of the way to Milford. On this particular afternoon, a meet is about to take place between two manifest trains. In the distance, UP 5990 East has just rounded the bend near Zane, and now sees the yellow signal at CPC 541. Looking the other direction, UP 8334 West has a red over yellow and will be taking the siding for the meet. Damaged hoppers from a train wreck head east on flat cars along with their trucks. The dispatcher wastes little time and soon has a clear block set up for the UP 8334 West as it continues out of the siding at Lund. A few days ago, we watched an eastbound empty ore train roll through Caliente. On this evening, we see it again, loaded and tied down at the north end of the Cedar City branch, waiting a fresh crew. This train is the OISLB. The O refers to a bulk commodity other than coal or grain. The letters IS is the point of origin of Cedar City, and LB stands for the train's destination of Long Beach, California. A crew was called to take the train west this evening, and so we waited, hoping to catch a departure before sunset. And we waited. And waited. Sometimes the dusk comes first, so unfortunately, we had to call it a night. The next morning, a local out of Milford heads east between Lund and Latmere. At milepost 576.7, we arrive at the eastern end of the Caliente Subdivision, a small windswept town named Milford. This is a crew change point for trains arriving between Las Vegas and Salt Lake City. A local also works out of here, servicing industry found in the Escalante Desert. While power for the local is shuffled about the yard, UP 8334 West slows to a stop at the UP office for a crew change. The new crew will be doing some work in Milford before starting their journey to Las Vegas. The 8334 is ready to start its work and heads west on Main 2, while in the distance, a coal train approaches the crew change point on Main 1, after making a run from Provo on UP's Lindale sub. But that's a story for another time. In the meantime, we hope you've enjoyed your journey through the desert country of southern Nevada as we continue our series on UP's operations over the historic Salt Lake route. As always, until next time, thanks for watching.